What is exaggerated turnover on a bounce back loan, and how can it result in director disqualification? Well, if you cast your mind back, and I'm going back to something like 2020, so we're going back about 5, 6 or so years, okay? What will have happened is if you applied for a bounce back loan, there was an application form process. And it was fairly standardised, didn't really matter which bank you were using. They might have dressed it up slightly differently in terms of how it appeared on the website and so on. But ultimately, there was one key question, and that was they were asking for information about the company's turnover because that was relevant to the amount of the loan that you were entitled to apply for on behalf of your limited company. And one of the questions was, what was your turnover, i.e. your sales, in respect of goods and services, for the calendar, that's January to December 2019. Now, that was probably the most common question in terms of how it was. So you had to do it in respect of the actual turnover in your accounts for 2019 for whole of the calendar year. However, there were some people who hadn't started trading by the 1st of January 2019, and they were allowed to estimate their turnover. Okay? Now, what went wrong where a number of people are concerned is some people exaggerate. In other words, they said their turnover was bigger than what it actually was in the calendar year 2019. That was one problem. Another problem was people who were estimating turnover exaggerated it out of all proportion in some cases. I'm not saying it happened routinely, but there are a number of cases where people took their estimated turnover and they took it to a level which was unrealistic. Okay? And there have been certain instances where directors have been disqualified for exaggerating it beyond the realistic level. Where it becomes particularly noticeable, however, is if you were already trading by the 1st of January 2019, if you stated your turnover was different to what it actually was, that's a potential problem. If you did it and you exaggerated it by more than 25%, they give you a little bit of leeway because people's accounting records might not have been exactly perfect, for example. But if you exaggerated it more than 25%, that is a complete no-no, and they will definitely, in many instances, particularly if you obtained a £50,000 turnover, which was the maximum amount, then that will be looked at for disqualification purposes. The two key issues for disqualification of a director in respect of bounce back loans was exaggerated turnover and misuse of the loan once it was obtained, not using it for the economic benefit of the company, but far too many directors, it seems, used it for their own personal economic benefits. So those are the issues, as far as particularly where turnover is concerned, that can apply in respect of director disqualification, which typically will be something that arises if the company can arise when it's examined, if the company goes into liquidation, or if the bank does their own review of the situation, if they've got their concerns, or if the company was dissolved, albeit it's unlikely because they've put a block on things like that happening. Anyway, questions, queries, concerns, give us a shout. We know insolvency inside out.